and we'll make a start. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest Family Business Insights with me, Paul Andrews, and my guest today, Darryl Bates-Brownsword. Succession planning unwrapped. So we're going to be looking at the topic of succession. Succession planning is often cited as one of the key challenges facing family firms, and in many cases it's the elephant in the room and something that's not actually discussed at all. So in this session we're going to look at some of the challenges around the succession planning process, the personal involvement of the older generation, the younger generation. Feel free to add your comments and questions in the chat box, and we'll cover as many as possible. Interactive session as always. I'm delighted that Darryl has joined us this morning. Darryl, I'm going to hand over to you to do an introduction and to get the session started, and look forward to posting some questions with you and discussing the topic in due course.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Paul, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. This is a topic that I'm super excited about. It's the succession and exit planning, family business, private business. You know, we just love to make sure that business owners get to enjoy the fruits of their labor over their years. And that's why I've written succession planning and exit planning, and in brackets, on your terms, because so often we don't get to do it on our terms. So that's the big key. That's the take-home message I want us to remember from today, is how do we do it on our terms, with structure and planning and pre-thinking. And you're going to hear me repeat, there's a couple of words that you'll hear me repeat again and again and again as we go through the conversation today. And the words are structure and unbundle. So, on our terms, if we're going to do it on our terms, we need to structure and unbundle. So there's my scene setting, if you like. So who are we? Succession Plus is a group of advisors who have worked in the SME, family business, mid-market community for on and off over the last 20 years. And in terms of succession planning and the brand Succession Plus, it started in Australia about 12 years ago now. And we moved to the UK and set up in the UK in 2019, lousy timing. And we've got offices in New Zealand now as well. And we've got some people on the ground working with us in the US. So what we do is we focus on working with business owners and business leaders to make that transition successfully, through their business with succession planning and exit planning. And we want it to happen as smoothly as possible, because the feedback is, if we're on the front foot, we do it on our terms. If we're on the back foot, we're just reacting and it becomes clunky. And the worst case scenario is, one of my clients shared with me once, he says, look, I wish I'd met you guys earlier, because my first exit just felt like a messy divorce. And it's and with family businesses and first and second generations, it's the issues that we need to resolve. Well, I'm going to hand it over to you guys and go, what have you seen? What are the answers you're looking to solve, to get from this conversation today? So if you can put your questions or your headlines in the message box to this question. What is it about succession and exit planning in family business that you've seen that doesn't work? i.e., what are the things you want to avoid? So if you can just put your answers in the message there, and Paul, if you can just give me a bit of a summary of some of the answers we get.
Will do.
And hopefully we'll get some responses to those.
Yeah, there's a couple coming in already. So avoiding one-sided discussions. So all generations should be included.
Yep.
We've got timing of conversations, starting conversations at the right time or the wrong time. So knowing when to hold that conversation.
Yeah.
The need to listen.
Yeah.
Avoiding bad family feelings that can actually end up destroying the family relationships. I guess for me, it would be managing the discussions appropriately with the right people involved. So giving everybody a voice. So making sure everyone's being heard.
Yeah, listen and being heard.
There's also honesty, the need for honesty. And that, I guess, is personal honesty as well as actually what it is you want to do and why you're in business and what's the purpose. Do you actually want to be in business together in the next generation would be one that I've seen quite a lot. And dynamics of the things coming through there, Darryl.
Okay. So the gist of it is, we want to make sure that everyone gets a voice. We want to get the timing right. We want, I've interpreted some of that as respect each other, and, getting the just being honest about each other. And one of the overlays is, what is it about families? And there's something about energy and relationships in families where, maybe we're just a bit blunt with each other. And maybe that's just an Aussie thing, I don't know. But, we seem to take our families for granted, and because they are family, and we've got this underlying belief of, and the people closest to us, we can treat maybe not as well as we always like to. So if we add a layer there of respect and go, respect the relationships, and the family members are, have got feelings and views, and we need to respect them and understand and appreciate those just as much as anyone else. So listen, being heard, and timing. So the timing one's interesting because, the next slide I had is the 3-year plan. And why is it that whenever we're talking about exit planning, we're talking to business leaders, and they'll say, hey, look, I'm going to leave, I'm going to hand over the reins, I'm going to move on in 3 years. And you go, okay, yeah, great. Sounds like a plan. And in 3 years' time, you're moving on. Yep, it's just on the horizon. And you catch up with them in 6 or 12 months' time, and you go, hey, how's it going? What's happening in the business? And they go, yep, it's all good. I'm going to be leaving in 3 years. You go, hang on a sec. I thought it was 3 years a year ago. What just happened to the last year? Did we not have a year? And I've come to learn over the years that why do people have a 3-year plan? Well, the 3-year plan is there because when we think energetically about 3 years, is just far enough away that I don't have to do anything specific today, is the mindset. So 3 years is just far enough away where I don't need to do anything specifically today. And I was having a conversation with someone a couple of years back, and we're sharing about this whole notion of a 3-year plan, and how it just seems to be a perpetual 3-year plan going on, and it's always 3 years. And he said, yeah, Darryl, you know what? You're right. I'm 15 years into my 3-year plan. So we started to pull apart and go, what is it about 3 years? Why is it that we talk about, I'm going to do things in 3 years? And what we learned is that preparing for exit and getting on the front foot rather than just reacting and trying to do it quickly is because we don't have any structure. No one ever taught us how to gracefully exit the business or gracefully hand over the reins in a particular role, the succession or exit. So when we're not trained in something, we're not sure where to start. It's all a bit ambiguous and vague and gray. So we need a structure. So this is where we talk about, if we've got a structure, then we can build and move things, and we can work to that structure, and the structure provides a framework for us to move forward. So the first structure we have is something that we call the options model. And what we need to do is explore what are the options in available to us. So the options model gives us some choices. And the first of those choices is, are we moving in towards succession planning or exit planning? So let's just have a look at the options model quickly, and I'll just explain what it is. And hopefully that'll just give us some insights to help us form our own structures and our own frameworks moving forward. So what we've got is, we'll start with, look, it's just like many models, we move with time, and on the vertical axis, there's no scale here, but we're just looking at value. And what happens as we grow over time is, the business on the left-hand side is when we're in growth mode, and on the right-hand side of that vertical axis is when we need to start thinking and executing our exit plan as opposed to our succession plan. So growth phase here, the business grows, and I've got it deliberately growing in steps, because as much as we love to think our business grows in a nice exponential fashion, or even in a nice curve, it doesn't. It grows when we have a look at it. We invest in our business, we build some capital, we build some infrastructure, and then we get the growth from that infrastructure. So then we have profit periods and growing pains and growth spurts, is the way we look at it. So whenever we're in a growth phase, and we have a look at this at our personal career as well. So if I'm growing the business, if I'm at the helms of the business and driving the business forward, I'm going through my own personal journey and I'm growing the business. Now, once I've got to a stage where I've fulfilled and I've achieved what I want to achieve, and I'm starting to think about other things, because as business leaders, we're always very forward thinking. We tend to be thinking about the future, and we tend to have a vision of the future. And what a lot of business owners have shared with me is they said, well, I just got to some point where the things I was thinking about the future weren't business related. There were things where I was thinking about, what I'm going to be doing after the business. So that's when I realized I needed to hand over and to the next generation or the next business leaders, whoever they were and what family roles. So that's the ideal, before they reach that point is the ideal point to start the planning, but that great point is where most of us do actually start the planning. So we then got some exit options, and I'll move through these fairly quickly. But we have a look at how the business is valued, and this model applies to family business as well as owner-led businesses. So what I wanted to share is what are the exit options is how do I step out of the business personally, is that there's 3 energy brackets or 3 energy categories. And the first is I've reached the point and I've gone, you know what, I know I want to get out of the business in 3 years' time, but I've got enough energy to put into and really drive it and go hard for the next 3 years. I want to work hard. I want to build things up. I want to leave a legacy. I want to leave my mark on the business. So this is the step up category of exit options, where we really want to crank up. And sometimes we refer to this as our one last hurrah. The next set of categories is where we go, you know what? I've been working with the business. I've been working hard. I've done my role. I've fulfilled my role. I've reached a stage where I'm looking to exit, and I've achieved everything I want to achieve. So what I'll do is I'll just gradually step down and I'll build a plan. I'll have a structure in place where I gradually hand over the reins, and we'll do a planned exit where I'm exiting out of the business and the other person's gradually hand over. So we've got a controlled phased exit. And hopefully this one doesn't apply, but it is what happens every now and then is where we just fade away. And that's where we take our eyes off the ball. We don't have a plan. We don't have a structure. And sometimes our business just stops being relevant in the market. And that happens. When that happens, we just fade away. Now, sometimes it's a planned fade away, and sometimes it's an unplanned fade away. But that's when we stop being relevant, or the business is too dependent upon us. So here's the options model. How does it help us? Well, it helps us understand where we're at in our business. What phase are we at? Are we working on succession planning? Are we working on exit planning? And if we're working on the exit planning, what's the structure we want to take? Do we step up? Do we want to step down, or do we fade away? So the first 2 choices that you need to make when it comes to exit planning is, am I succession planning or am I exit planning? And when I get into my exit planning, what way do I want to go? Do I want to step up, step down, or fade away? Because these have big strategic choices on the way we do things. So they guide the conversations that we have. They guide the business planning that we're going to be working on, and they just guide all of our decisions. So if we use this as a framework, it can structure our conversations and means we're on the front foot rather than just reacting on the back foot. The next part of the structure that we want to talk about is going, okay, so we've made our strategic choices now. We know our overall direction. The next piece is where, what we see in a lot of businesses is at the operational level. Now, as business owners, when we're shareholders, we're stakeholders in a business, there's basically 3 areas or 3 main areas of business structure. And what we see as business owners and founders and stakeholders of a business is that often we bundle the three benefits of ownership together. We've got the three areas and we blend these together. And if we're in business together, we have two of us might be in business together and we go, because we're running this business ourselves, therefore we share the equity. Therefore we do the same roles and therefore we take the same income. And, because, we're all equal and what have you. And in many businesses, before they become, as they're going through their growing pains and reach a certain size, they tend to bundle those three areas together. And what we want to say is, if we're looking at our succession and exit planning, and we're starting to have conversations, what we need is some tools to help us structure those conversations. What are the tools that help us structure and guide the conversations and give us meaningful conversations, and to do it in a stepped and a controlled and a commercial fashion, at the same time considering all of the energy and the feelings and the relationships and the family dynamics. So what are the tools we have, and what are the structure? Well, the first structure that we need to consider is the business operating structure. And the business operating structure looks at all of the day-to-day. It looks at, what are the things that we run the business, because regardless of whatever industry we're in or whatever type of business structure we have, we need to have a business that's relevant to the market and provides a good commercial service. So we need, to get the growth. So the first structure we look at is the business operating structure. And the business operating structure is everything that has day-to-day relevance in the business. And it's all of the functions that we work on that bring in revenue. So that's everything from marketing function through to the sales function, through to the product design and delivery function, through to client services. The other side to the business operating structure is all of the back office functions. All of those things that we do that we just need to do that are a cost of being in business, but they don't generate revenue. So they're all the back office. And I've just headed that there with monitor, because they're the things that are typically accounting, they're compliance and legal. It's our business reporting, it's our information systems, it's our HR systems. They're all the things that we have that we keep tabs on the business and make sure and monitor that things are going the way we expect them to be going. And it's all about running the business. The next structure, or the next side to the structural element we have is the board and control structure. So this is the black side of the business. So this is all of the functions we have in the business where we're looking ahead of the business. So the things in the blue circle are the day-to-day operational functions. The things in this black circle are the functions where I'm looking ahead of the business, and I'm typically operating 6 to 12 months ahead of the business. Now, who runs these functions? Well, it's typically the board. So when I'm on the board of a business, so I've now got my board structure. The board structure is responsible for control, the strategic direction and governance of the business. And what we tend to do is we tend to, we blend our hats, if you like. If I've got a board hat, if I've got an operational role in the business, it's hard to flick from one to the other and not blending them together. And this is why we want to unbundle. Now, the third area of structure is this green side. Now, the green side represents the culture and the theme and the flavor of the business. So the green is all about, it's the direction, it's the purpose, it's the culture of the business. Now, what do we mean by that? So if we have a look at the business and we go, look, now what we're sharing on the screen is the whole business represented there. But it breaks down into three areas, and we talked about the three areas or the three benefits of owning a business. And the three areas are are represented by the three colors. But if we're breaking it down from a functional perspective, what we're saying here is that the ownership structure is responsible. So the shareholders of the business are responsible for setting the tone of the business. They set the direction. They go, this is why we're in business. This is the problems that we solve in the marketplace. And this is the client base that we serve. Here's why we set up business. And the best way to describe that, I've found, is to talk about, the culture of a business, because we want people to, the best businesses are when people want to show up. And this is, why is this relevant to succession? Because it talks about people succession and how long people stay in our business. Best way to describe it is to give an example. So imagine we're walking down the street and we're heading out, I don't know, we're heading out to lunch or something, and we walk past the building site, and we see the people working on the building site, and we see the first person there, and they're obviously building a wall of some sort. So we stop and go, hey, look out, looks like an interesting sort of site. What is it you're working on today? And the first guy says, well, I'm building a wall. Can't you see? I'm laying bricks here. Like, you guys crazy? You can't see what we're doing. I'm laying bricks. And we go, okay, fair enough, no worries. So that person's just showed up to their job. Their job is laying bricks. They know they need to lay their 500 bricks a day. They lay their 500 bricks. They go home. They come back the next day. They're treating their job like a transaction. I'll lay 500 bricks a day. You pay me to lay 500 bricks a day. Our contract is fulfilled. We walk up, we keep walking down the street, and it's quite a long building site. So we see the next guy and we go, hey, what is it you're doing here? This person goes, you should see what we're doing. We're building a cathedral here. It's going to be amazing. Where we're headed at the end of the day, we've got this cathedral. It's going to be amazing. So just an example of two people doing exactly the same job. One person's really excited about showing up for work. The other person's not so excited. They're just treating it as a transaction. You've got the heart and soul of one person. And when you've got the heart and soul of someone, they're engaged and they show up. So that is all driven, it's all led by that green, which is the responsibility of the shareholders and the stakeholders of the business. Primarily the shareholders, the owners of the business, set the tone, they set the culture. The culture is led from the top, and especially in mid-market businesses where the owners are visible in the business on a day-to-day basis. So that's our responsibility. The next responsibility of the strategic design, and this is where the unbundling comes into play. The strategic design is we go, okay, so the shareholders are responsible for the vision and the culture and the tone of the business and the direction. Then the board come into play, and it could be the same people, but this is where the unbundling comes into place, and we need to wear a separate hat, is that the board is responsible for going, okay, let's grab that vision and let's turn it into a strategy. And we'll set the strategy of how the business can achieve that business and run day to day. And then we'll appoint the people to run the business. So the board appoints the CEO to run the business. And again, it could be the same person. And it's a different responsibility now in terms of running the business. So they're the three areas. And the struggle we often have is, how do I unbundle, and how do I keep, when I'm in my job role, how do I keep sticking to my job of running the business and whatever operational role that is? When I go to board meetings, how do I keep those conversations around board issues and board structures? And when I'm in shareholder mode and in shareholder meetings, how do I set the tone and vision of the business? So they're three separate areas of responsibility. Now, how does this unfold when it comes to succession and exit planning? Is that the employees are responsible for bringing capability to the business. They're responsible for bringing the skills. The directors are responsible for setting the pace of the business, and the shareholders are responsible for the funding of the business. So the owners are responsible for the funding. And what we want to do is, when we're doing some exit planning and we're going and succession planning and going, hey, look, I've come to my time and my energy where it's time for me to step down. And we talked about unbundling. Well, what is it that we're talking about unbundling? Is that we go for each person in the business, each person in the family of, they come to their point, they've got separate needs, they've got separate desires, and they've got separate legacies that they want to leave behind, is that we need to unbundle their roles in the business, and we can go, let's build the exit plan for this person, and let's consider these three areas, and if we unbundle them, we can do it one at a time. So I might want to, depending on what's important to me as family person number one, I might be looking at going, I need to unbundle, I want to step out of my employee role. I don't have time, I don't have the energy for doing the employee stuff anymore. I want to step back and I just want to sit on the board and I want to maintain my shareholding. Person number two might go, you know what? I don't want to take the board responsibility. I'm quite happy in my role. I love showing up for work. I love being part of the business. But in terms of me, I want to step back from the responsibilities of being a board and being a director of the business. I just want to be, contribute at that operational level. And if what we can do is we unbundle income, ownership, and control, and we build a succession and exit strategy, and we step down, step up, fade away, whatever strategy in place for each of those three areas separately. And what we found is that if we use this structural approach and go, let's have a look at the three areas of structure, and if we unbundle those and put together a plan specific for each person, then that gives us a framework to have the conversations. We can start planning it 3 years in advance. We can start going, okay, how do I step down from my employee role? So who needs to fill my role? What's the next generation? How do I train them up? What are the systems? What are the legacy? How do I train that? Director role, how do I step back? How do I ensure the future of the organization? How do I make sure that there's no gaps in the board? How do we rather, plan and make sure we fill those gaps? And how do I step down? Because the step down and the stepping out and succession and exit planning, what we're talking about here is the structural and commercial side. We need to consider the relationships and the personal energy. And it's been my business. I've been involved in this business for the last 30 years. It's like my baby. How do I step back from that? And so we've got the energy management as well as the commercial management. So how do we want to look at those? Well, in terms of going back to our structure, there's three benefits, and we talk about the benefits. And so how do I get income to help me, fund my day-to-day operations? Well, as an employee, I get paid for the work I do and the capability I bring. What do directors get paid for? Well, they get paid for their strategic knowledge and their connections. So that's why you want to have non-exec and outside members contributing and involved in your board, because it brings diversity and it brings that balance and it brings that different perspective. And how do shareholders get rewarded? Well, they get paid for the use of their asset. It's a bit like a rental property. If you own the property, you get paid for the use of your asset. And hopefully when all things go well, and so how do you get paid for the use of your asset? Well, that's through dividends. And hopefully you also get a capital gain. As a shareholder of the business, one of the other benefits you get is capital gain. So there are all the structures that we work with, and we're going, okay, so there's the framework to structure our conversations. How do we break down the conversations? The next thing we want to do is go, okay, so there's a great theory. What we want to do is put it in place. How do we, over the 3-year period or 2 years or 12 months or however long my planning horizon is, what's my step-by-step guide? So if I've got a step-by-step guide that can lead me through, then the 21 steps is the tool we use. We know that a business is ready for exit we can do it on the front foot or on our terms when all of these things have been considered. And it's our step-by-step plan. And what we can do is, I'm more than happy to send you a copy of this step-by-step plan, put a message in the chat box if you'd like a copy, and we've got a PDF copy that we can send over to you, no problem at all. But what we want to do is, what's the whole process that we want to do to consider step-by-step planning? And if we want to consider people's feelings, if we want to create forums where people are heard, is that we use this as a framework, this unbundling structure, looking at the structure, looking at the 21 steps. We go, if we've got a framework, then we can guide it through it rather than it feels like we're making it up as we go along. What haven't we done before? So what's the key message I want to take away is that if we use a structure for all of the conversations we need to have, whether we're family business succession or private ownership succession, the context is the same. We need to step down from income, ownership, control. We want to feel like we're doing it on our terms. We want to be on the front foot. We want to feel like it's graceful. We don't want it to feel like a messy divorce. And by using these tools as structures to guide our conversations, we can talk about the frameworks and what the frameworks require. And that way we can depersonalize it, and helping depersonalize it just makes those conversations happen a little easier and with a little more respect and directional and purposeful. We can, by understanding people's timeframes and where they want to spend their time and where their energy, where they're attracted, whether it's that blue, that black, or that green side of the business, we can just be honest with ourselves and go, where do I enjoy spending my time? Where do I get my fulfillment? What, do I really love being on the strategic side, or do I really love, just being operational and just showing up and being involved and energetic in my work day to day? Or do I really like just setting, that founder type role where I'm just working on the vision and the direction and the future purpose of the business, and just understanding the meaning and the overall purpose of why we're in business and the tone of the business? So am I more energized by working on that green side? And one of the things that often comes up is fairness. And I don't think that came up in today's, or it might have, but I didn't write it down. But by recognizing the three areas, the red, the blue, the black, and how people make their money, if we stick to the frameworks and the guidelines around, do I get paid for my job? Do I get paid for my knowledge and my strategic direction and my contribution at the board level? Or do I get paid at a shareholder level? Where's the guidance and the framework that, I can use those to guide me? And, if we stick to those principles and those outlines, we can demonstrate that we've got a fair structure in place. And by using the tools, it just guides us on what is fair and allows us to have those conversations without getting personal around what is and isn't fair. So what I want to share with you today was just that there are tools, there are frameworks, there are guidelines to guide us through these conversations. And with those tools and guidelines, they can help us be honest and just identify the issues that are important to us. So where do we go from here? What are the next steps? Well, first we need to figure out what's our time frame. If we know what our time frame is, and then we can figure out, do we want to step up, step down, or fade away? Use the structures to get functional around our conversations, the red, the blue, the green, the black. We want to unbundle those and treat them separately. We've got a book called Enjoy It. If you want to download a copy of that, let me know. I'll send you the link. And that is it's a full-blown case study that uses the 21 steps to build an exit plan. Next step is, one of the things, and we haven't talked about much on this call, is employee share ownership, an option. Some businesses do want to have a structure where they recognize employees that aren't part of the family, but how do we reward and acknowledge and recognize those people? And employee share ownership plans are getting really quite attractive around being complementary structures for family businesses now. And the next thing that we really need to do, and the most important thing that I want to share with you, is we need to document your plan. If you've got a plan documented, you can share it with the people and you can communicate it. And it's the best way that I know around communicating the plan and having and structuring those conversations and keeping them, avoiding getting into personal, heated, sometimes conversations that do happen with families. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I know I've run just a couple of minutes over, Paul, but happy to move over to questions now if there are any.
There are, Darryl. That was really interesting for me, actually, and a different perspective on succession planning, because often people just jump into the process, don't they, in terms of who's going to take over, and it's usually a conversation about the management positions, the managing director or the CEO role. It doesn't they tend to blend in and forget the ownership side. So there's the whole thing you've done there for me is put a perspective on it in a very different way with a framework that really helps. I guess honesty is really important, isn't it? The whole process is depending on honest, open conversation. So I probably answer my own question, but the first one I've got here is, why is succession planning so difficult?
Because we're dealing with feelings and energy, and there's no right or wrong answer with energy and feelings. And when we don't have a framework, it can get personal, and we're just trying to resolve the feelings without a framework, and that's why it gets stuck, and we go down into rabbit burrows and judgment. If we've got the framework, we can go, yeah, look, we still need to address our feelings, but the framework allows us to have the conversations, because we're now talking about the framework and using the frameworks as tools to guide and lead us through those conversations. And that way, they just accelerate things, and they help to depersonalize it and move away from our having the feelings and energy-based conversation. And the frameworks allow us to have the commercial conversations that address our energetic needs or our feelings.
Yeah. And I guess it links back to the other tools and things that many family business owners will have in their toolkit in terms of the family charter, the roles and responsibilities, and some of those general guides in terms of what does a responsible owner look like, what can you do as a shareholder. So it brings all of that together in another layer of framework to help the discussion and guide it. So I guess the more that you've got documented, agreed up front, then presumably there's less resistance and conflict potential down the line.
Absolutely. And you've talked about family charters and agreements, and they all come part of the green. And so often they're not documented. And you work with family businesses, and there's energy about family members coming into roles, and we haven't even touched on, is the role earned or deserved, or is it just pure family members, jumping into roles that, they're not credible, as opposed to family businesses where, family members, yes, they get priority, but they still have to earn their stripes. And all of that is just perception, and perception is just energy, and that's what makes it hard. What's the old saying? This would be a great business if people weren't involved. And then you got the family relationship energies as well. That just makes it even more exciting.
So just building on that then, so how would you deal with a situation where there was conflict and there was a family where there were some individuals that were resistant to change? What sort of tools would you bring to the fore?
Well, change is key, isn't it? And I think of, I've worked with businesses where, I've had family members involved. The founder is one business I'm thinking of is, he was in his 80s and he still just loved showing up to work. He managed to hand over, and we worked with him to hand over the business, the strategy side and the direction and the functional management to his son. And his son had more energy, had vision, direction, and to move it forward. And we were able to just communicate with the founder that, hey, look, this is the foundation that he was able to build on. He was able to take what you've built and move it forward. And the way he's moving it forward may not be the way you wanted to do it. But from a functional income ownership and control perspective, yes, you still have some ownership, but you've handed over the board, the strategy of the business to the next generation. And you still, you've chosen to have an operational role. So your role is blue operational at the moment, and you love showing up to work and being part of the team, but your contribution is at that level, and you've stepped down, did a gradual step down, and handed over the strategy to the future direction to the next generation. And by just using the model, we were able to sort of unpick the energy, because dad wanted to keep getting involved and interfere with the direction of the business of what the son was making. And so we were just able to use the model to unpick and sort of go, what's fair, what's the way, how do we set the business up for the most likelihood, the best chance of success? Well, we need to hand it over fully, and your son needs to be able to do that, with knowing that he does have control, that he doesn't have someone looking over his shoulder all the time, interfering and undermining his credibility, which is how the son was feeling it in the business in an operational sense. So, whenever you've got energy and emotion and conflict, we need to figure out what model we go to defuse the situation. And then we can just point to the model. And whenever we've got a model to point to, we can go, well, it's, the model says this. It's not me sharing my opinion. We're just using the model as guidance and a framework to structure our conversation. So, using a framework, in my experience, is the best way to defuse energy where there's conflict and friction.
And presumably the base point for any of these processes then is to actually get full buy-in up front before you even start the process, to make sure that everyone's on the same page. so they completely understand the framework and buy into it. Otherwise, I guess you're on a sticky wicket.
Absolutely, and yeah, that's the way you use the models. Yeah, good point. And it's a bit like a movie. You've got to, whenever a movie starts, they start with setting the scene and they sort of set up the characters. It's the same. We go, well, we're going to start succession planning. Let's paint a picture of the end we want. What does that end look like? So here's, in 3 years, we keep going back to the 3-year plan. In 3 years, here's what we want it to look like. So let's get everyone bought in and aligned. Why do I say bought in? I hate that term. Let's get everyone aligned to the picture, and we'll paint a picture of what it looks like at the end. And then if we've got a 3-year plan, we go, that's what it looks like in 3 years' time. Right. If we're going to be there in 3 years' time, what does it need to look like in 2 years' time? Work with us. Let's all contribute to painting that picture. Okay, so if we're going to get there in 2 years' time, what does it need to look like in 1 year's time? So in a year's time, what do we need to look like? You guys paint the picture collectively of what it needs to look like. And then we start to get that step-by-step process, and we get conditioned to that picture. Because where we started from as business leaders are visionary people. They need to see that vision. And if they can't see the vision and therefore the steps to get there, they're going to fight against it. The other thing is it needs to feel like their idea. When business owners and business leaders, they're very confident people. They're used to calling the shots. So it needs to be on their terms. That's why their terms is so important. So any exit strategy needs, we may work with them to help them guide and massage it, but it needs to feel like it's their decision. It needs to feel like it's their plan. They own it. And that's much like any business plan. If you have your boss say, here's your business plan, here's your budget for next year, you don't have any ownership of that. But if you work together with your boss and go, well, here's the budget I think I can achieve for next year, you own it because you were involved in making it.
Yeah. And what can the old, two questions I guess go in hand really. What can the older generation do to enable the process to perform is the wrong word, but perform better? And conversely then, what can the younger generation do to add value to the process to make it better? So the two kind of roles at ends of careers, different ends of careers, but what can they do? What can the different generations do to make it work and have more chance of success?
Yeah, great. That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Or the £1 million question. What the older generation can do, I think, is go, look, these are family members. Reconnect to your charter, why you set up this business, or if you weren't, if you took over it, depending on how many generations have been, it's going, what is the charter of this business? What's the big vision? And reconnect to the big vision, what we're trying to achieve. So what's the context of the business? And refresh yourself with what the context is of the business, of what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. And then when you understand the context and you're refreshed and you're aligned to that context, then you can go, what do I need to do? What's my role? What's my objective that I'm trying to achieve during my period of being custodian or guardian of this business? Right, so my whole objective is to keep the business going for the next generation. So I need to remind myself every now and then of what I need to be doing to set up the next generation, to give them all of the skills, all of the resources that they require to continue this family legacy and to continue this business going on and meeting all of the objectives that we have as a business. So reminding myself of that. And then the next thing I can do as the older generation is trust that over the years, I've been instilling the skills, guiding, mentoring the next generation, and set them up for this role. It's their destiny. It's their future of what they're going to be doing. So I need to trust that I've given everything I can and that I've done a good job, and that, whilst it's a bit scary at some points, that I need to let them make the same mistakes that I made. Because when I first stepped into it, and the only way I grow is that I make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and grow on. So I need to set up the structure, the culture in the business, that it's okay to make mistakes, but let's have a culture where we learn from the mistakes, and we're not going to get judged by our mistakes, but we create it as a learning environment. So I need to trust myself and that I've instilled all those good disciplines, and we've got a good generation behind us. The other thing is that I need to do is, from the younger generation, is that I need to respect the older generation, that they've been there and done that, and they were once in my shoes, and we just need to acknowledge each other's positions, and we need to set up that environment where we actually listen to each other, because whenever there's conflict, too often and this came out right at the very beginning, is we want to be heard. So we need to set up that culture, that environment, whereas we want to listen to each other, and we want to listen to be heard. And I think it's one of the habits that Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he says one of his habits is seek first to understand before you want to be understood. And that's a mistake that I know I make, and a lot of us do make, is that we want to be heard first and we want to be understood first. And if we just take a breath and step back and go, okay, let me listen to you first and share your thoughts, and then maybe you'll listen to me. And we create that environment where we go, well, let's listen to each other and let's understand each other's viewpoints. And then that allows us to move forward. I'm not sure if that answered the question or if I just rambled on there.
No, I think it definitely answered the question, Darryl. I think linked to that, then another question we've had come in is, any tips to get the meeting in the first place? I mean, we've all come across the kind of the more stubborn older generation that says they want to step down, as you said, the 3 to 15-year plan that doesn't happen. Any ideas or tips that you can give to get the meeting set up in the first place, to start the conversation?
Yeah, ask open questions. So you're saying you want to step down. Okay, so can I just check, what sort of time period are we talking about? Okay, so you want to step down in, we'll use that magical, mythical 3 years. So if it's 3 years' time, okay, so if we want to make this happen, because I want what's best for you, if you want to leave in 3 years' time, I've got a lot that I need to do by the sounds of it, we need to cover a lot of ground over those next 3 years. So if we want to make that happen in 3 years' time, then what we need to do is just check in and go, okay, so let's bring it back, shall we? So in 3 years' time, in 2 years' time, what do we need to achieve in 1 year's time? So let's start by just breaking it down and just go, if you want to leave in 3 years' time, if we both want this to happen and we both believe this is the best thing for the business, for this to happen in 3 years' time, let's break it down. How do I eat an elephant? One bit at a time. So it's just breaking it down into smaller pieces. Otherwise, we just get overwhelmed with so much that needs to be done, and it's so, we'll never get it done, or we've got plenty of time and nothing needs to be done today. Yeah. We need to break it down and just put a plan. And that's where those 21 steps are really helpful, to just provide a structure. It's where that functional model of the 3 circles, we call that our structures model we work with those number of slides. And we just use the tools, and we go, let's just go back to the tools and go, using these tools, what are all the steps we need to achieve to get there in 3 years' time?
Yeah, so, and I guess the plug for you, Darryl, and it's not really a plug, but it's often easier sometimes to bring an external consultant or an advisor in to host those initial conversations to get the ball rolling, isn't it? Rather than trying to be the lone individual within a family that's trying to make it happen yourself when it's not necessarily being very well received.
Yeah, look, it's hard to be a messiah in your own land, isn't it? And sometimes the consultant comes in and says exactly the same thing, but for some reason they listen to the consultant. The other benefit of the consultant is that they've done it. They know the process. This is their job, is to run this process. So you'll get there faster and with less pain if you bring the consultant in, and they can just guide and steer the process, and you just don't waste any time on things that you don't need to work on. Yeah, look, as long as you've got a structure, and there's more than one structure that is appropriate. This is just the structure that we've used and we've developed over the years that we know works. Breaks it down, start with the context, what's the biggest picture that we're trying to achieve, and then just break it down into more and more layers of detail to the point where you know what you need to be doing next week to enable that person to exit in 3 years' time.
Yeah. And I guess the last question for us before we wrap up is kind of, we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic in terms of some of the lockdowns and everything else that's happened. How has the pandemic affected the succession planning conversation from your perspective? What have you seen? Has anything changed?
Yes and no is the answer. So depending on the business size and the industry that the business is in, some businesses have just gone into survival mode and just gone, everything's off. I just want to put everything off. I'm set back by 2 years now. That's delayed me by 2 years. Others have just gone, hey, we've had a fantastic time during the pandemic, Our industry has been one of the lucky ones. We've really flourished. We've had phenomenal growth. We now need to control our growth. From a succession or exit planning perspective, again, some people have gone, you know what, I've enjoyed this working from home, and I've got used to being home and not working so much or having this flexibility. I've really quite enjoyed that. How do I bring that forward into a more of a full-time situation for me? So for some people, it's accelerated. So it's highlighted the differences, the contrast, if you like. And with contrast, we're able to make a choice. You know, winter, summer, you know, contrast. How do I know I love the summer? Because I know I've had winter and I don't like it. And for some people, it's the other way around. It's just the contrast. We need the contrast. And the pandemic has highlighted the contrast for us between work and not work. And even though we've been working from home, but it's given us the opportunity to see that contrast. And for some people, it's accelerated plans. So I can't give you a straight answer other than it's just given people the opportunity to reflect because they've seen the contrast of what they've had before.
Yeah. Darryl, that's a really refreshing take on succession, and I really do appreciate the time you've taken to explain it to us this morning. I think, if nothing else, it's put a different perspective on how to have a conversation and start a conversation around succession, which all comes back to your own journey, your own personal ambitions, which then feeds into the family ambitions and the family business ambitions. So it's a very complex scenario. We know it's often difficult to have conversations because it involves someone stepping down and then ultimately not being around. But those conversations do need to be had. So Darryl, thank you so much for your time today. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks very much, Paul, and all the best with the rest of the summer.
Thank you very much. Could you press stop for me, please?
I will. I'm hovering on it right now.
To the audience, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you for your questions and comments. I will get